Okay, thank you very much. Our next panel of distinguished speakers, The Way Forward Without Nuclear Weapons and Nuclear Power. We'll open this very informative and enlightening panel with a presentation by Arne Jong-Johan, who is with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Actually, the Böll Foundation is the German Green Party's outreach here into the United States and around the world. They're a think tank, and the import of this is that we're going to hear about the German transition process to what should be a 21st century energy policy for the entire world. But I wanted to just, an example of the work that the Böll Foundation is doing was just a week or so ago, I attended a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. that was co-sponsored by U.S. Senators Olympia Snowe and Tom Carper on the offshore wind development that's going on in Bremen and Bremenhaven, Germany, and how this is putting advancing the alternative wind energy project and putting thousands of people back to work in the process as we begin to make the shift. The demonstration for the whole world is occurring right now in Germany. So we're looking very much forward to that presentation. Then we're going to hear from Akiko Yoshida, who was many of you saw her yesterday as the plenary speaker, but if you missed that, she is Friends of the Earth Japan and in the position right now of advocating for Japan's shift to a 21st century energy policy focused on renewables. And the whole process right now is that only 2 of the 50 remaining reactors in Japan are currently operational, and there is a big fight to keep them shut down. And as I understand in most recent news, even the OE reactor may be closed soon because of the discovery of earthquake faults right under the plant. And then we'll hear again from Dr. Arjun Makhijani with the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research on how we're going to make that transition to a nuclear-free, carbon-free energy policy here in the United States. So let's all welcome our speakers, and we'd like to begin with Arne Jong-Johan. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Paul. Good to see so many of you. And thank you for inviting and including me. I brought a slideshow, and you can see it here, a little cut off. Can we perfectionize it a little bit? And so it's not my first time in Chicago. I was here last year, but I also was here 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was an exchange student in my junior year in high school, and I stayed with a family in Decatur, Illinois. So I like the Midwest. I've come here back and forth. And actually, 20 years ago, that was a time I was 17, and there was a movie out in the movies. It's called Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it was for the first time that I realized that there are German words in the English language that are being used as English words, like kindergarten, which has a German origin, or Schadenfreude is one that I heard of, or Leitmotiv, or others. And I think there's one more coming to it, and that is the word Energiewende, energy transition, loosely translated, as you see here. But I wanted to share some of the nuclear piece, but more on the renewable side. I think what's happening in terms of renewable energies, in particular photovoltaics, solar PV, is dramatic, and is worthwhile to take a closer look at that. And our aim, the aim of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, is to make this story accessible for the international audience, to provide an English overview. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go into it. There we go. Thank you very much. So quickly, the Böll Foundation, as Paul mentioned, a Green Party affiliated with the German Green Party with roughly 30 offices around the world. This one in Washington, especially for transatlantic relations, on energy issues, but also other green issues. You all know that Germany has a long tradition, the anti-nuclear power movement has a long tradition in Germany, goes way back into the 70s. I was a little kid then, I don't know anything about that. But this is a map about Germany. You see a lot of circles there, and those circles are nuclear power plants in Germany and in neighboring countries. And the darker part inside of that circle, that is a 30-kilometer radius around the nuclear power plant. That is the evacuation zone, I was told, that was announced for Fukushima. The wider circle around that, the light red, that's an 80-kilometer radius, and that was recommended by the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, for American citizens to stay away from Fukushima. So we just drew this map, circled around the nuclear power plants in Germany, and as you can see, these circles cover quite a lot of the country. In fact, the wider circle covers basically half of all German population. 40 million of all 80 million people live close to 80 kilometers or closer to a nuclear power plant in Germany. And after Fukushima, people realized, you know, that's quite close. That's a high density of nuclear reactors in a country like Germany. And you can also see neighboring countries. There are some very old, some risky reactors there in the Czech Republic, that is Temelin, in France, in Switzerland. So Germany, as you all know, is highly populated, very densely populated. We are basically a country half the size of Texas, but there's 80 million people living in there. So there's a high awareness of the risk of nuclear power. If something is happening, then that would have a dramatic economic impact, not to mention all the other impacts. And I think that really became clear for Germans after Fukushima. How do the Germans plan this nuclear phase out? Some of you probably know that the recent decision of the government of Angela Merkel was not something very new, but there was a lot of policy work before, and actually in the year 2000 the government introduced a first nuclear phase out. It was actually an agreement between the government and the nuclear utilities. These nuclear utilities signed up an agreement to say, we're going to shut down all the reactors in Germany over a certain time of year, over certain years. And here you see a timeline of from the year starting 2000 to the year 2023, with all the nuclear capacity being online. On the very left hand you can see we basically started off with a nuclear capacity of 22,000 megawatts. So that was 20 reactors. And over the time, by the year 2011, before Fukushima, 2 reactors were already shut down, Stade and Obrigheim, based on that existing law of the old red-green government. And after Fukushima, the then center-right coalition with the Conservative Party and the Libertarian Party and Chancellor Angela Merkel, and this center-right coalition is more pro-nuclear than the center-left with the Green Party, of course. They decided to shut down 8 reactors immediately after Fukushima. So you see a big drop there, going down by 8 gigawatts. And they assigned for each of the remaining 9 reactors a fixed shutdown date. So in the law it's now written when each of these reactors will be shut down. You can see the last one will be December 31st, 2022. That's the date when the 3 last reactors in Germany are scheduled to be shut down. Now, when you talk about the energy transition, the Energiewende, and you know, as a German living in the United States, I read a lot about the English newspapers or American newspapers and the media. There's a strong focus about the nuclear piece and the renewable piece in the electricity sector. However, this energy transition with the aim to decarbonize the economy, that's across many sectors. It's in the electricity sector, but it's also transportation and housing. It's in the heat sector. And so this is an overview. This is basically the energy transition in a nutshell, with all the different targets the government has set for different sectors. So for example, in power consumption, there's the target to ramp up renewables to 80% at least by the year 2050. So 80% of all electricity should come from renewables by 2050. That is and you should remember, this is the conservative government. All the opposition parties are saying, this is too slow, we can go to 100% and we can do it earlier. Yeah? And I think this, all these targets that are implemented partially in ordinances or in laws, all these targets provide a high investment certainty for the economy, for utilities. They basically know, if you look at the lowest row there, that is the targets for greenhouse gases. So Germany aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions at least by 80% by mid-century. If you know that as an investor and you think about investing in a new coal plant, you have to calculate. You have to do your math if it's really worthwhile to invest something now that on the way might be forced to shut down, because there's a broad political consensus in Germany to do this. And I think this high investment certainty is really important in the German story. Now, before I worked with the foundation in Washington, I was an advisor for the Green Party in the national parliament, in the Bundestag. So I worked a lot on the cap and trade bill and the nuclear phase out and the Renewable Energy Act. And at the year 2000, that's when I started, but it's a coincidence that there were some great movements afterwards. But in the year 2000, we basically introduced this Renewable Energy Act, which I think is a flagship policy for Germany and has been copied many times around the world. And at that time, renewables had a share of 5% in Germany, and it was mostly old hydropower. As you can see, the lower blue line, that is all hydropower. And we were saying, well, we want to grow renewables to 7.5% or maybe 10%. And the feedback we got was, well, that is too ambitious, that is too fast, renewables are not reliable enough, that is too expensive to go that way. And actually, these targets were easily surpassed. The government always had to correct its targets and upgrade them to higher numbers. And as you can see here, there was a strong growth after the year 2000 in onshore wind, that is the light blue going up. Then around the year 2004, after new amendment to this policy, there was strong growth in biomass and bio-waste electricity. And then most recently, and that is on the right upper side, there's a strong growth in photovoltaic. And today, photovoltaic is providing 5% of electricity per year in the German electricity mix, something that I thought a couple of years ago was way too ambitious. And a side note, on the very left, there's a little box that says original feed-in tariff. So this original energy policy was implemented in the year 1990, back then again by a conservative government. It was actually farmers in Bavaria that wanted to sell their hydropower electricity to the grid, and they were tired of negotiating with the utility that did not want to buy that power, and they asked the conservative government, please give us a policy, a mechanism that we don't have to negotiate with these guys anymore, but we can just sell. And so this was very important. The architecture was implemented in 20 years ago in 1990, conservative government, and then a center-left government upgraded that policy. And how does that work? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the feed-in tariff, but it's basically, it has two main elements that make it so successful. First of all, if you're investing in a windmill, let's say that, when you connect to the grid, you know for sure that for the next 20 years, for each kilowatt hour you feed into the grid, you get a fixed return, a fixed payment back for that electricity hour. The second one is maybe even more important. The second one is that you have guaranteed grid access. That means you don't have to negotiate with the utility, but the utility has to buy your power. They have to connect you to the grid, and they have to give you priority. They can't block you and say, well, our grid is overloaded with coal power or nuclear power. They have to buy your power. If they don't buy it, they have to compensate you, so there's some details that I can't get into it right now. But basically, this combination of a safe financial return and the guaranteed grid access, that provides a high investment certainty for renewable energy projects in Germany. So banks in Germany, if you tell them, I have this piece of land and I want to build windmills or biogas or want to put solar panels on my roof, banks know this is a very safe investment and they give you the money at very good conditions. It's very easy to do that in Germany. And it's remarkable. I think this was only seen later on, that this policy actually opened up the production of energy, it expanded that. So not only utilities anymore produce electricity, but regular citizens do. And how does it look today? This is a pie chart of the ownership of these renewable energy projects. So there's right now 53 gigawatts, or that's the number for 2010, 53 gigawatts of installed renewable energy technologies in Germany. And we have 4 big traditional utilities. They're called the Big Four. They run coal power and they run nuclear power. These Big Four utilities have a tiny share in all the renewable energy projects. It's here at 6.5%. 6.5% of all new renewable energy projects come from the old guys. More than 90% come from new players, from new investors. And the interesting part about Germany, and I think that is unique in international comparison, a little similar with Denmark, that half of all these investments come from private citizens, comes from farmers, comes from people getting together in a co-op, a cooperative, to pool their money and to put solar PV on the town hall or put a wind farm out on in front of the village. And that is really a striking difference, for example, to the developments that I observe here in this country, where a lot of the policies, I would say all of the policies, are geared towards large-scale investors, and they're not geared to private people going into this. Yeah? There are some. I use these slides from a new website that we just published this week. The website is called www.energytransition.de. I'm going to show it later on again. And I just wanted to run or show you some of the nice graphs. This is a graph, for example, on the jobs. You can see the black column. Those are the jobs we have in Germany in coal mining, in the coal electricity, nuclear electricity. That's roughly 180,000 jobs, and that hardly changes. But we have a strong additional new jobs in the whole renewable energy sector. More than 380,000 people by now work in this sector, and the numbers are expected to grow even further. And it shows that renewable energies create more jobs than conventional energy does, and a lot of these jobs are local jobs. They are being created in these communities, and they cannot be exported. So it's really helpful also for a healthy economy. And democracy was mentioned here. Another graph, this one is on the question of, well, how do you decarbonize your economy without paying too much? You know, does it cost us to get rid of coal? Renewable energies are expensive, so what does that do to GDP? Well, in the German case, you can make a very good case to say, actually, this was a very a path with prosperity. Since 1991, the GDP in Germany grew by 27%, but at the same time, emissions declined by 24%. So we have a growing economy but declining emissions, and I think that's a good case for a green economy. And I want to show you a couple of slides on solar power, which is, I think, the remarkable story in Germany. And I have a map later on, but you have to imagine that Germany is about as sunny as the state of Alaska. Yeah? So we do not have we do have sun days, but the radiation is not that strong. It's not the best country to showcase how solar really works, but still they manage to do it, seems. By now, Germany has installed 30 gigawatts of solar power, of solar PV. A lot of that is decentralized, so it's on rooftops. There are also some on green fields, but there's a lot of this stuff is on rooftops. And we are only learning now to understand what does that do to the energy system in general in Germany. And this is a graph that shows basically one day from midnight to midnight again, and the upper gray curve, that is the power demand. That is all the electricity that is being used during the day, and it's a typical curve that peaks over noon and then goes back down again at night when, you know, when the factories slow down. And in this, when in Germany, when we do have a sunny day and the sun shines, all these solar panels produce electricity. So what you will see is that when the sun rises until 12 and 1, we have a very high peak of solar power production. And in this case, the example was chosen of 22 gigawatts of solar power. That was a day in May. And just to give you a perspective, 22 gigawatts of solar equals the amount of 20 large coal power plants or 20 nuclear power plants. That is as much power the Germans get today when the sun is shining. And you know, this is really hurting the business of traditional utilities. That's the time when they can't sell their own power and they have to reduce the output of their own power plants. This is why they get mad at solar PV, and this is why they want to stop any more investments in solar, because it means they have to take down even further their own power plants. How does this compare to other countries? And how does this compare to the grid in general? This is maybe a complicated slide. I'm using these for the first time, so please forgive me. I'm still trying to frame it in the right way. But in this slide, we compare basically the solar installations in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and the United States. And Italy is also known to be a front runner on solar. Spain also a little bit. US so far is not to be known a front runner. How do these different countries compare? Well, you can, if we take it just for the easy comparison, Germany and the United States, on the one hand, you can see that Germany has installed 30 gigawatts of solar power. The US has installed 4 gigawatts of solar power. So in the absolute amount, that ratio is something like 7 to 1. Germany has about 7 times more solar power installed than the United States. If you compare that to how much electricity is in the grid in total, then you can see that Germany has basically could power half of its electricity needs with the solar that is installed in Germany, 50%. The United States, however, the 4 gigawatts are so small they would only cover 0.5% of the electricity demand here in this country. So that gives you a better understanding of the proportion, how big things are in Germany, and how tiny solar is still in the United States, and how big of a potential there is in the United States. And there are some smart people doing comparisons between Germany and the United States. A lot of the renewable energy experts are from the US looking to Germany and trying to crunch numbers and compare it to the US. And this is some work that is being done by the University of Berkeley. I think it's called the Lawrence Lab. Yes. And this is comparing costs. How expensive is it to install a solar panel in Germany, and how expensive is it to do that in the United States? And basically their result was it costs twice as much to install the same solar panel in the United States than in Germany. And the reason for that is not the hardware. The hardware is all the blue stuff on the bottom, the panel, the inverter, and other electronic pieces. That is roughly the same in Germany and the United States. But where Germany is much cheaper is in terms of the labor cost, the supply chain, permitting, overhead costs, profits. In all these categories, the German market is much more mature and has learned to become much more effective. So this also is an indicator for the point that for a country like the United States, there is not really time to wait for cheaper solar, because the technology is already cheap. What is expensive is to get the market going, to reduce the cost in the market, to, for example, have the technicians that they know what they are doing, to scale up the markets so there's it gets more common. And if you live as a German abroad and you know those things from the German discussion, but you read international newspapers, it's quite amazing the gossip, so to say, about the German story and what's all happening there. You read about the blackouts and skyrocketing energy costs, rising emissions, and a lot of these issues, I realize that there's a lot of attention on Germany because the traditional industry or the traditional energy, fossil fuel and nuclear industry, they are somewhat afraid that this German story works. Because if it works in Germany, then likely it can be done anywhere. Because Germany is a highly industrialized country. If you can run a country like Germany without nuclear power and even without coal power, that should be done that should be possible anywhere. So there's a lot of, we observe a lot of, a lot of PR work against the German story, and we see it as our role as the Bell Foundation to help provide more transparency, to give more information. And even though, I'm with the Green Party, we have right now a center-right government with Chancellor Merkel, she's a conservative. I think they're not doing a great job on the energy transition right now, but I still think in general, it's of course a good policy and they're moving things forward. And I brought a couple of these copies here of this little book, The Myths and Facts. It's available on our website and I still have some copies here. And now I want to, in my last couple of minutes, I want to draw it back to the United States. Let me just say that I think each country needs to do its own energy transition. I can tell you about the German story, but you can't implement things one-to-one, and countries and societies have to find their own way. But I want to highlight a couple of things that I think are worthwhile to mention. And this one is on electricity prices. So in Germany, we do have high electricity prices. I would pay something like 30 US cents or even more for 1 kilowatt hour in Germany. And that is relatively expensive. I think California might be getting in the same direction, but in most places in the United States, the price of 1 kilowatt hour is around 10 cents or 11 cents. Some pay even less. But the Germans don't really have a high energy bill. It depends on how much you use, right? You can have high prices, but you can still have low cost if you don't use as much. So this is a small comparison between Germany and some of the US states. And I just pick, let's say I pick Iowa. People in Iowa roughly use 900 kilowatt hours per month of electricity. They pay roughly 10.5 US cents. So per month, they pay $93 for electricity needs on average. In Germany, the Germans pay roughly $108 per month. So they pay more than in Iowa, but they have much higher prices. They only use 320 kilowatt hours. And if you look at states like Alabama, again, they have much cheaper electricity rates than Germany, but they use much more. So people in Alabama pay $140 per month for their electricity needs. Germans pay $108. So you always have to put these numbers in comparison. And I thought I had more US-German things, but let me give you 5 takeaways of the German energy transition. I think foremost, it is ambitious projects. It is an ambitious project, but it's feasible and it's doable. Second, you have to realize in Germany it is driven by cooperatives, it's driven by citizens and by small investors. It's really a bottom-up push that is happening over there. It's not asking the big utilities, please invest in renewable energies. That is not happening. Third, the energy transition provides jobs and income for communities, and it also provides a competitive advantage for the German industry. A lot of these jobs and a lot of these technologies that are being developed, they offer new opportunities for very brown, for very traditional industries. So for example, the steel industry is happy about many windmills in Germany because they provide all the resources. Shipyard regions, often in economic decline, they are becoming the new offshore wind hubs. So they get a new perspective for economic development. Farmers today are investing heavily in renewable energies. So these good developments reach a lot of different industrial sectors. Fourth, I haven't really dug into that, but I want to make it very clear, especially for this community, fighting climate change and phasing out nuclear power can be two sides of the same coin. Germany is phasing out nuclear power and at the same time is reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. That is not in contradiction. And last but not least, This energy transition is affordable for Germany. I think it even pays off, but let's keep it simple, it's affordable. If it's affordable for Germany, it is even more so for many other countries, because many other countries have much better resources when it comes to solar. And these technologies are much cheaper now than 10 years ago when Germany started. So this is a snapshot of the United States and Germany. Some of you probably have seen it. On the right-hand side, you see a blue box. That is Germany and the sunshine in Germany. On the bottom left is the blue box of Alaska. Germany is as sunny as Alaska. If you look at the United States, if you look at the Midwest or Chicago, this area has at least 40% better solar resources than Germany. If you look to California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, out of one solar panel, you get twice the amount of electricity up there. It's much easier, and it's much less costly over there. This is the website, the German Energy Transition, www.energytransition.de, and it tells the story of Germany much better than I just did, believe me. Take a look at it, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Arna. Our next presenter will be Akiko Yoshida.
Now I'd like to share you about Japan's energy policy after Fukushima accident, especially about the national discussion on revision of an energy policy and the new nuclear policy, nuclear regulation. After the disaster, March last year, we have built up new network against nuclear energy. A network for nuclear phase-out and energy shift. In this network, called E-Shift, there were many anti-nukes groups, as well as environmental protection groups like FOE Japan, WWF, and also some youth groups and consumer groups. So very variable network. Such network was first founded after Fukushima. Now there are around 60 groups in this network and more than 200 people on the mailing list. We have once a month meetings and sharing information and discussing about activities and policies against the governmental policy. This is the website of that. And this is the time schedule of Japanese government's revision of energy policy. In June last year, the former Prime Minister Kan has announced that we have to revise the energy policy. The energy plan before the Fukushima was so very pro-nuclear. It was so Japanese government was targeted to increase the rate of nuclear energy to 50% by 2030. It contains to build 14 new reactors by 2030. So it was not realistic anymore. And there are 3 processes regarding to this energy policy revision. Basic energy plan, revision of basic energy plan, revision of nuclear energy policy, and revision of climate policy. In each councils, the draft plan was discussed and was announced by the National Policy Unit, a draft for new energy policy. They proposed 3 options for national discussion. in the end of June. The first was zero scenario, nuclear phase out by 2030. The second was 15 scenario, to keep nuclear energy 15% at the time of 2030. The other was 20 to 25 scenario, to keep nuclear energy. And this zero scenario, nuclear phase out scenario, was bounded with the phase out of reprocessing policy. In summer and August, there was a national discussion. So the way of national discussion was first information service on website, and public comments, and public hearings in 11 cities, only 11, but also including Fukushima, and deliberative opinion research, and cooperation with non-governmental meetings. We, NGOs and citizens groups, has discussed about activities for this national discussion with the network of eShift, what I have introduced you just before. We first called for sending public comments, as much public comments as ever before. This is the character of public comments we used to call to the public. We also made a website to convey our message, to send their comments. We held events and seminars, and has collected public comments on big demonstrations or actions in front of the Prime Minister's house. We also called for voluntary meetings of citizens groups. We called government officials to our voluntary meetings, and so such meetings were in more than 20 cities. We, FOA Japan, also hosted some meetings in Tokyo and in Fukushima, especially in Fukushima, to convey their direct voices of affected people in Fukushima. The result was, to the public comments, there were more than 89,000 comments. And the point was, these 89,000 comments were each very various. There is only a few copies each person has written by yourself, very various comments. And 87% of that supported nuclear phase out, zero scenario. And even 78% supported immediate phase out. That was really amazing. That could say the success of citizens' movement. And also the demonstrations in front of the Prime Minister's house was considered. The result of this national discussion was so concluded that more than half of the Japanese citizens are for nuclear phase out. With that result, the Japanese government has announced this new energy policy, innovative strategy for energy and environment, on 14th September, we will devote all policy resources to achieving zero nuclear power generation in the 2030s. Yes. 3 principles are so. First, no new or additional construction of nuclear reactors. Second, the strict application of the 40-year limit to the operation of existing reactors. Third, and only reactors that were confirmed to be safe by the Nuclear Regulatory Authority will be allowed to be reactivated. But this strategy obtained also contradiction in itself. It contains the continuation of nuclear fuel cycle policy, reprocessing policy. Because the Aomori prefecture is against the acceptance of waste of final disposal. Okay. And only next day, the Minister of Industry, Yukio Edano, has announced that 3 power plants under construction are outside of the principle. So outside of this principle. So this is the nuclear fuel reprocessing policy. We know that this policy is not succeeded. It's always stopping. Monju and Rokkasho, they are stopping yet. And this is the Omar nuclear power plants under construction. This is now 30% constructed. But this is the map of around these Omar nuclear power plants. In the 30-kilometer radius around this power point, around this plant is Hakodate city, a very big city, in the Hokkaido side. But to the Hokkaido side, to this Hakodate city, nothing was informed about this power plant and construction and about the danger of this reprocessing of these power plants. And this is the site of these Omar nuclear power plants. And there is a person who haven't sold their ground to this company. She is still living here in this site. The green area is that this is still private ground. So the company has to change its plan, previous plan. So the construction is delayed many years. Yes. And this is the relationship between government and Nuclear Regulation Authority. The Minister of METI, Yukio Edano, says it is up to government to decide. It is not up to government to decide whether reactor restarts after the Nuclear Regulation Authority has been set up. But the head of Nuclear Regulatory Authority, Shunichi Tanaka, says we are responsible only for confirming whether safety standards are met from a scientific and technological standpoint. He said that government decide. So the nuclear regulation policy was also revised after Fukushima. Before, it was very problematic that the regulation agency and nuclear was in the government who was supported nuclear policy. So this nuclear regulation authority was founded like NRC in the US, the independent authority. But is this nuclear regulatory authority actually independent? This nuclear regulatory authority has 5 members, but these 5 members are not approved by the National Diet, which is actually needed, because many of the Diet members, as well as citizens and citizens groups, were against these 5 persons, because the chairman, Shunichi Tanaka, was a key member of a government panel promoting nuclear energy and headed government research on the technology. And he was also against compensation for those who evacuated on their own. He said it doesn't need to pay for voluntary evacuees. And the other persons were also from nuclear industry and related organizations. So who can say that this is really independent from nuclear industry and the old system? The Nuclear Regulatory Agency is now to announce guidelines for the nuclear disaster prevention. But it is also problematical because this is the simulation of the authority in November, but it shows only very high radiation dose by the accident, 100 millisieverts in 7 days. In some cases, this evacuation area is more than 30 kilometers. And this is OE reactors, which are now online, two reactors. And it is found that under these OE nuclear power plants, there is an active fault. But the authority and the government has not stopped these 2 reactors and are going to have another research. But we urged the government to stop immediately these reactors. And these are faults around Fukui Prefecture. Around all nuclear power plants in Japan, there are many faults. And this is energy supply in Japan. Without nuclear power, we have enough energy supply with other resources. And that is, we know that because this summer, we only had 2 reactors online. But how is going after the innovative strategy for energy and the environment? We don't know yet. With this strategy, Japanese government is to determine the new strategic energy plan for Japan, but the schedule is delayed because some committee members are against this nuclear phase-out policy. Some people from industry is still saying that we don't have to abandon nuclear energy. And now we have election in 2 weeks, so it's very important which policy we citizens choose. And also in 2 weeks, on 15th and 16th December, we have a big conference on nuclear phase-out and nuclear regulation. Nuclear Free Now. This is broadcasted both in Japanese and in English. You can check it out and can see the streaming also in English. You can also have some further information on our website, FOE Japan. Not very much, but something in English. This picture is on the 5th of May, on which all nuclear power plants were shut down. So we have to fight together for nuclear-free Japan and for the world, for the children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akiko. We'll now hear from Arjun Makajani with IEER. I think Arjun, because he spoke to great length on the carbon-free, nuclear-free topic yesterday, he's got a surprise presentation for us right now.
Right, you heard me speak about nuclear-free United States, so I wanted to make a few comments on the weapons part, disarmament, what it means, what it ought to look like, why we're not getting there. One comment about the nuclear power piece, as you know, and as Kevin Camps mentioned, we did succeed in getting a court decision voiding the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's confidence that they know what to do with the waste, and reactor licensing is suspended for 2 years. I am working with Diane Curran and Mindy and some other people to formulate some comments on the waste confidence decision and a no-action alternative, which would mean under which there would be no new waste confidence decision. That means it would be suspended. The government would have to admit that it doesn't know what to do with the waste currently, so that this licensing pause and would be extended for a number of years until a certain information and technical goals are met. And that's sort of the framing that you're going to, most of you will see that in a couple of weeks when I'm done formulating these comments, and I'm working closely with Diane and Mindy Goldstein on it. Okay, nuclear weapons. You know, as I mentioned yesterday, you know, carbon-free, nuclear-free is back there as a book, and there's also nuclear power deception. It's been mentioned that nuclear power was a fig leaf to cover up the horror of the nuclear bomb, and the documentation from the Eisenhower administration is back there in the book that IEER did called Nuclear Power Deception. As I mentioned yesterday, you know, it was very difficult for people to see in 1939 and 40 and 41 that they shouldn't be building the bomb. But from December 1944, the bomb became an illegitimate project, in my opinion. Hitler didn't have the bomb, plutonium hadn't been separated, and it should have stopped at that time. We had something called the nuclear arms race, but it has been presented as a US-Soviet thing, that it was an arms race, both sides were kind of building up to forestall an attack one on the other, but it wasn't really quite like that. There were a few things that happened in 40 and 41. You know, the US decided to make an atomic bomb 2 months before Pearl Harbor. You do know that. October 9th, 1941, the decision was taken to launch a bomb project to see if it was feasible to make it. And the man who was at the head of that was Vannevar Bush, and his whole objective, he was vice president of MIT and president of Carnegie Institution, and his whole objective was to bring academia and academic scientific resources to provide additional technological muscle to the United States as the top power after the war. So he was determined that academics should be seen very differently from what I project myself as Dr. Egghead, that if they were going to make weapons, they should make weapons that would be used in World War II. So 2 months before Pearl Harbor, a man at the head of War Scientific Decision Making, Office of Scientific Research and Development in the White House, reluctantly went on with the Manhattan Project. It wasn't called that then, because he was pressured, you know, Hitler may have the bomb, he shouldn't have the monopoly. But he was a man who was determined that weapons research during World War II shall be used during World War II. So in a way, October 9th was the seed date for the use of the bomb, even though the bomb project hadn't been launched. But conceptually, it was 2 months before Pearl Harbor. Most scientists who were involved in it, the European emigres, the Jews, did not know that, and they didn't even know the context of it. One more thing before I reflect on disarmament. I wrote an op-ed about this in Japan on May 5th, 2012 of this year, reflecting on that date. That May 5th was a kind of a happy date this year in Japan because, from our point of view, because all nuclear reactors were shut. But May 5th was also a very unhappy date in the history of Japan. May 5th, 1943, next year the 70th anniversary of the first targeting decision for nuclear weapons. There was a meeting in Washington, headed by Vannevar Bush, the very same man, Conan, president of Harvard, and 3 others, Leslie Groves, in which they decided to not target Germany. And it was not a racist thing. There was a lot of racism against the Japanese, but that decision did not have race as an element. They were afraid if the bomb didn't work, that Heisenberg and the other German physicists would do reverse engineering and use the unfissioned plutonium to make a bomb themselves. So they targeted Japan, but not Japan, because they were afraid of the same things with the Japanese. They decided to target the Japanese fleet in the island of Truk. And since May 5th, 1943 to the end of the war, there's no evidence that Germany was ever targeted. In fact, Japan, all the preparations were to bomb Japan. And then from 44 onwards, it was Japanese cities. What would disarmament actually look like? I think we will know that we have arrived at nuclear disarmament when there are no more nuclear secrets. So we will always know how to make nuclear weapons. We can't unlearn that. But I have observed that we know how to be cannibals, but we're not. So can we at least bring nuclear disarmament to that level, that if we think it's wrong to kill our neighbor and eat them up, even though it has happened in our lifetime, right? Everybody knows about Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed his neighbors and ate them up. We didn't say preemptive cannibalism. We didn't say or deterrent cannibalism. You know, I'll eat up my neighbor before he kills me and eats me up. No. We restrained ourselves and said, this is a crime that needs to be punished. I think we ought to take the same attitude to nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to take 20 minutes for questions. So thank you, and your question.
My name is John Miller. Arnie, I think there needs to be some perspective in your observation that in Germany, the price of power is 30 some odd cents a kilowatt hour, but Germans use much less of it. Well, that's just a supply-demand relationship. You make something very, very expensive and people will use less of it. An example that comes to mind is I used to be a TV reporter in Miami, and the average water use in Miami was twice what the average water use was in Key West, 180 miles away. And the reason was it cost a lot of money to pipe water to Key West, and so Key Westerners abandoned the idea of having a lawn, whereas Miamians thought it was their birthright to have one. So, I mean, independently, you can say, hey, you want to cut electricity use in the United States? Well, raise the price considerably, have a tax that the money would go for renewables, and you'd see a similar phenomenon happening here.
Was that a question?
Is there a question in there? Make it a question, though.
Okay, it's obvious a question. Do you agree with that or not?
I'm not sure I understand you, sorry.
Well, you gave it just as two unrelated facts. The price in Germany is much higher than the United States,
yes.
but the use in Germany is much lower than the United States. I'm saying, is that not simply a price-demand elastic curve?
Yes, I agree there is a correlation between high energy prices incentivizing to use energy more efficiency and more efficient. And the Germans did that also with an energy tax on electricity, for example. But in this case, I wanted to raise the example to highlight, I sometimes hear, well, you Germans can promote renewable energies because you have high energy prices. I think that's not a good argument because it depends on how much you pay overall for energy. So it also means countries with low energy prices, like the US, can also move forward on renewable energies. That was my attempt.
Hi, I'm Ellen Thomas. I've been involved with the Proposition 1 campaign for abolishing nuclear weapons and converting the arms industries to clean energy industries for a very long time. And I just wanted everybody here to know that 10 times a bill has been introduced into Congress called the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act as a result of a successful voter initiative in Washington, D.C. in 1993. And it's asking the U.S. government to tell the world that we will get rid of all our nuclear weapons if everyone else does, and we'll use that money instead to shut and clean up the nuclear weapons industries, which of course includes nuclear power, and to convert the arms industries into mass-producing clean energy systems so that nobody loses any jobs. The nuclear workers can be part of the cleanup, and the arms workers can be part of the transformation of our energy environment. And it's going to be reintroduced, I hope, in 2013. And I want to ask all of you to support it.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Carberry with the Friends of the Earth in Iowa and also the Nuclear Free Campaign for the Sierra Club. Arn, this question is for you. We've introduced in Iowa a feed-in tariff bill for 5 years in a row, but the utilities there say they will rather fall on their sword than to allow a feed-in tariff bill to pass. And we've also been working on community wind projects for years, and we don't get very far with them, which are very similar to your co-ops. Do you have any advice for how we could do an Iowa energy transformation or a U.S. energy transformation to model yours?
Well, that's a difficult question. As I showed, in Germany it worked because at first the utilities did not realize what was behind that law, how effective it could be. Yeah, but I think the German experience shows that if you involve not the usual stakeholders, but if you expand your camp for renewable energies, if you involve farmers, churches, I don't know, maybe hunters, or there can be many different groups. If you expand that coalition and also win, across the political spectrum, stakeholders for that kind of policy, that is very helpful. In Germany today, no politician can afford to be against renewable energies or be for nuclear power. They get voted out of office.
Thank you.
Hi. Oops, I I have two questions, and one is for you about Germany, and that is, I also had that question about the feed-in tariffs. Excuse me. I read recently that you are exporting energy to other countries. So I think that's because you can't really ramp down the nuclear power plants or ramp down the coal plants that fast on your graph of the peaks and valleys. So you end up exporting it, correct, if you could do that. And then for Mariko, you guys cut your energy use by, I think it was 30% when the nuke plants went offline. Was that mostly conservation, or did they ramp up the thermal? I saw on your graph the thermal, so do you understand that question? Okay, so I think Japan cut their energy use by 30% when your nuke plants went offline, okay? And I'm wondering if that was mostly conservation, which I think it was, but how much did ramping up the thermal energy, I think it was on your graph, how much did that, was included into that 30%?
The question of export was that electricity exports. And that's one of the myths that I often hear is, well, if Germany is shutting down its nuclear power plants, then it's just importing nuclear power from France, which is neighboring to Germany. And actually, that is not true. The opposite is currently true. When Germany shut down 8 nuclear power plants after Fukushima, the trains were still going, the lights were still on, there was enough power supply. And the reason for that is that the highest demand there is in Germany is usually in November. On November evenings, when it's cold, when it's dark, that is the highest demand time usually. And that is roughly when across the country you need 80 gigawatts of power in the grid. And Germany has, without all nuclear, 100 gigawatts in the grid of renewable capacities, gas, little oil, coal, and additional then nuclear. And so Germany replaced the declining nuclear capacity with a lot of existing power plant capacities. So yes, old coal or maybe gas that was waiting to come online at peak times, but also over the last years with new renewable energy electricity. And today, there's actually the challenge in Europe that Germany, on sunny, windy days, Germany is flooding the other markets with basically cheap electricity, almost for free. Yeah? And you have the governments in Poland, in the Czech Republic, they're complaining about this low-cost electricity because it means they have to reduce the output of their own plants. And they lose money by doing that. Yeah? And I think part is why they're also angry is because Germany did not communicate well this energy transition. It did it, this government, the Merkel government did it in a very rushed and hasty way and didn't communicate it with the neighbors, but the neighbors are affected by it. And it already shows the big potential for European renewable integration, where you can have, large, you can connect to Norway, which has large hydropower resources, which will be a very important battery storage for Europe. And in return, Germany can provide Norway with cheap wind power or solar power, depending on supply and demand. And to wrap that up, last winter it was actually that France reached its capacities of meeting all the demand of electricity of its customers with nuclear power. All the nuclear power plants were running, and at that time France was importing more and more wind power from Germany. So actually, even with the nuclear phase out in Germany, Germany is helping France to keep the lights on, and they have more than 80% nuclear in their grid. Yeah? So nuclear is not a reliable and safe energy source.
I've understood how we could fill up the nuclear energy in this summer. We had many thermal and many stopped thermal and hydropower plants that are restarted.
You have, this is for a German friend, you've spoken about photovoltaic in your charts. I'd like to know more about wind. How much of your renewable is wind and compared to us, and any other major sources of renewable?
Well, how much wind compared to photovoltaics was in my carbon-free, nuclear-free scenario. You know, my carbon-free, nuclear-free exercise was not meant to be a recommendation for what we should do in terms of proportions or how it would look in 2050. It was meant to show that if you decided to do this with available technologies, that we could have a mix of wind and solar that would do the job: wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, and so on. The mix will obviously depend on the relative price. At that time, 5 years ago, PV was much more expensive than it is today. Costs have come down of PV very fast. And the other thing is, smart grid has progressed much faster than what I thought back then. So today, actually, doing a distributed grid, having solar photovoltaics on commercial installations and even individual houses, and having a smart grid. So having a distributed grid has become much more attractive, and having microgrids connected to the larger grid has. So today I would say the way things are going, solar should probably play a bigger role than wind. Even though we have plenty of wind in this country, the wind is mostly in the central belt of the country or offshore, and it requires extensive transmission infrastructure. We can do it, but given the battles over transmission lines, given the land requirements, given the battles over offshore, we haven't gotten even one offshore project commissioned or even really started as yet, even though the Europeans have been doing it since 1990. I would rather lean more heavily toward a photovoltaic policy, except in the central belt of the country, from say, North Dakota down to Texas, you know, to the mountain states, to some extent this part of the country, where wind should probably play a bigger role because less sun and more wind.
Okay. My name is Rita Manios with the West Side Greens and also Chicago Indie Media. It was so refreshing to hear about the Green Party because we haven't heard about it much in this conference. And Winona LaDuke, who was a vice presidential candidate for the Green Party, was featured. And really, it's the only party that is anti-nuclear. So what I wanted to hear about is, because in this country many people are afraid to vote for the Green Party, I want you to comment on how important the Green Party is in Germany to the energy transition. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Fraser. I have two.
If you could keep it to one question, though, because we have another questioner behind you.
The feed-in tariffs, I have one more question. Have you run into any problems with trade agreements?
Trade agreements?
Yeah, international trade agreements, especially since obviously you're flooding other places. Yeah. I noticed recently Canada has been.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Leslie March, and I'm with the Sierra Club Nuclear Free campaign, and I live in Hillsboro, Oregon, home of Solar World. So what I'm concerned about is the chart of green jobs looked wonderful, but right now we're having a blip in Oregon where both Vestas, which is the Swedish company that makes the wind turbines, and Solar World are laying off. And so there's a lot of discussion about misuse of subsidies. So I'd like to hear your take on that.
They're all yours.
I think on the domestic markets, Angel probably has an input. Just the quick one on the wind energy in Germany, it's the biggest renewable source. Right now, Germany has 25% renewables in all electricity. So a quarter of all electricity comes from renewables. And I believe wind is roughly 14% points of those 25. So it's just the largest. But onshore, all the good locations have been used now. So we're looking more into offshore, and then in a couple of years, growing with repowering, so exchanging older windmills and replace them with fewer new ones, much more powerful. There was the question about the Green Party and the role for the energy transition. I am biased, as you know. I'm with the Greens. I think they played a big role in this. I think also the Greens are, as much as they're a driving force for this, they're also a reflection of the German society. Yeah. It's not like Germany happened to have a Green Party and the party changed the whole country. but it's also the country changed, and the reflection of that is that the Green Party today is in many state governments. We're governing in a lot of state governments. For example, there's the state of Baden-Württemberg, which is a very industrial powerhouse. It's the home of Porsche, Mercedes, a lot of Mittelstand, a lot of manufacturing. And this state is governed by the Greens. It's the first Green governor ever in Germany. And they get a lot of credit for doing good energy policy, good economic policies. So I think the Greens in Germany have come a long way over the last 30 years from being a party that was founded on the basis of being in opposition, of not wanting to govern, governing through and changing the republic. And I think in terms of energy, there has been no stronger political force than the German Green Party to work on this transition. And I'll give them your greetings. I will let them know this response. They will like to hear that. The question on the trade issue and the feed-in tariffs, I know there's a discussion in Ontario because of the domestic content clause, meaning that Ontario only incentivizes renewable energies or gives them the feed-in tariff if at least some of the part was manufactured in Ontario. Now Germany, you probably know, is a very export-orientated country, very much towards free markets. Even the Green Party is, promoting that idea, and is doing that. And so Germany has never really thought about doing that. I mean, we now also have we never thought about implementing trade barriers against solar panels from China, for example. It's the other way around, that with China coming into the market producing solar panels at very low cost, that makes it much cheaper for Germany to go solar. And it would be not good for us to block that, but it's good to use that. If you look at the numbers and the economic benefits that are being created when you shift to renewable energies, a lot of that comes not from the manufacturing, that is a part of it, but the majority comes from actually installing these panels. It goes to the technician that climbs up the roof and installs the panel. It stays with the bank, stays with the community. So Germany is really reserved on putting up trade barriers against renewable energy technologies. And the last question was on the layoffs. We also have a wave in Germany of how do you call it? Well, we do have this pressure on solar PV, for example. I think in Germany now roughly 80% of all the new solar that is being implemented, 80% comes from China, 20% is roughly domestically. But Germany also benefits from the China boom because German machinery is being used in China. And some of the hardware also that is relevant for modules is being done in Germany. So it's not a loose situation, I would say.
So just a quick comment. I know we're completely beyond our time to the last question. This distressing thing, it's arising really because of the haphazard and very short-term and highly politicized, uneven nature of U.S. energy policy. So we have a production tax credit of 2 cents or something on wind energy, but it expires every year or every other year, then it's got to be re-upped. Well, if you don't have certainty in the investment for something that takes 2 years in the planning and 2 years in the implementation, and you have to wait till they resolve the fiscal cliff in order to deal with the investment tax credit, naturally people in the wind energy are going to be laying off people because the way they calculated the economics depended on the subsidy. In 2004, I made a speech at the North American Energy Summit in Albuquerque saying wind energy actually didn't need subsidies. It needed transmission guarantees. It needed the Federal Energy Commission to be more empowered regarding interstate transmission. That's what you need if you're going to do wind energy. There was a guy from the wind energy industry who agreed. But we go on because we've got this lobbying system, the transfer of public assets into private profits, and everybody's a part of it. I personally think that feed-in tariffs are simple. They don't involve taxpayer dollars. They involve transfer of ratepayer dollars to other ratepayers and to social benefits. We're not in a position to implement that much here, maybe partly in Vermont or Oregon or something but not nationally. It's not going to happen. We need a steadier, more predictable energy policy. That's why I recommended renewable portfolio standards. 10% of electricity will come from solar in Minnesota by 2030. That's one of the things we're arguing for in Minnesota. Similarly, you can create similar policies that will work for your state and provide some certainty to investors. We live in a world in which investors who have money make a lot of decisions, and if you were an investor, you'd want some certainty too, that you're going to get 5%, 7%, 10%, something.
Okay, let's thank our speakers.